Not only they slaughtered hundreds of millions of people, but guess what else they did? They burned down all our libraries. Equality and freedom, they do not work side by side. You can choose one, but not both. Alrighty, so in the last episode, we talked about who gave the world civilization. And it was Patanjali. If you haven't watched that episode yet, I highly recommend that you do before coming to this one. So this episode, we're going to talk about how do you uphold civilization. We are talking about what are the steps that you can take or you should take to uphold civilization, to create a society that actually guarantees peace or that actually promotes the non-violent features of life. Let's put it that way. Because violence is one spectrum, and we know that the history of humanity is full of violence. So how do you move if that is civilization, that's your definition of civilization? I disagree. That's barbarism in my opinion. So how do you move from violence to peace? That's the fundamental, that is something we are going to uncover in this episode. So who actually upheld this civilization? Is it the John Locke and Voltaire and the Western liberalism? No. Krishna. We have to go back to India. We have to go back to Bhagavad Gita. Now, before I move on, I have to give you a warning. What I'm about to say is going to be very, very, very offensive to a lot of people. So if you are a staunch supporter of Judeo-Christian philosophy, this is the time to stop this video and move on. Alrighty? So there was a war between two clans. Like these are the people belonging to the same household, like they're blood related. Okay, they are not just relative, but they are actually blood related. So the battle of Kurukshetra took place between these two clans. There was Kauravas on one side who had the might, there were 100 brothers, and there were then Pandavas on the other side. There were only 5 brothers, they had the right. So Krishna, divinity, God incarnate Krishna, he took the side of the right, like he appointed himself as the advisor to the side of the right, to the Pandavas, and then he obviously gave his army to the side of the might, the Kauravas. So it was a war between might and right. Okay, so how do you uphold civilization? What was the message? Like Bhagavad Gita was delivered in this battlefield, the battle of Kurukshetra. So Krishna's message was that even if you are weak, even if you are small in numbers, you have to take up the arms to fight to destroy the evil. You have to take up the arms to fight to destroy the evil. So Krishna obviously, like he was the advisor, he didn't take up the arms. He told Arjuna, his disciple Arjuna, to kill his own family. So Arjuna was overwhelmed. Okay, like how can I kill my family? How can I slaughter my own family? And then of course Krishna gave Arjuna divine vision. Krishna gave Arjuna divine vision that you are never born, you will never die, you exist for eternity, that the soul, there are lots of things, like I highly recommend that you read that conversation. I highly recommend, like I cannot recommend highly enough, that you are going through a cycle of life and death until you reach perfection. Journey of a Pashu to Pashupati. Pashu, it's an animal. Pashu, Sanskrit word Pashu. Pashupati, when you add the word Pati at the end of the noun, Pashupati, Pashupati is the nickname for Lord Shiva. So journey of a Pashu to Pashupati. Journey of an animal, like it's a metaphor, it's not just animal. Everything that behold my hundreds and thousands of wonderful forms, that everything moving, non-moving within this universe is me. You are going through this cycle of life and death until you reach perfection, until you reach freedom. We talked about freedom. What exactly is freedom in the last episode? So, Krishna is talking about divine vision, the vision that you cannot achieve with your mortal body. When this John Locke and Voltaire, this Western liberalism, you guys cannot understand the most basic notion of civilization. What is civilization? Again, we talked in the last episode. You have to suppress these negative tendencies and you have to uphold these positive tendencies. That's the most foundational principle of civilization. And this is where the notion of discrimination comes along. This is where the notion of choice comes along. This is where the notion of responsibility comes along. See, Bhagavan Krishna is saying that, behold my hundreds and thousands of wonderful forms in various shapes, sizes and colors, the notion of divine vision. So he is talking about life, that everything moving, non-moving within this universe is but me. So what is life? Life is this change. Life is this variety. One of the fundamental elements of life is that life changes. So the question is, in this variety, in this change, where do you find unity? Like this video is about Dr. Jordan Peterson, where he argued that the ultimate purpose of life is what? Making peace, which I wholeheartedly disagree.
Is there an ultimate purpose of life?
Yeah, sure.
What is it?
What we're doing here,
Which is what?
hopefully trying to make peace.
And the reason for this disagreement, like I explained many of the things in my previous video, and one of the fundamental reasons as to why I disagree with this statement is because life is about change. That what is life? If you have to define life with one word, what is that single word that defines life? Change. If you come to Hinduism, Hinduism says that this life has two elements, Purusha and Prakriti. What is Purusha? Something that does not change. And then you have the Prakriti, everything else that is constantly evolving, constantly changing. So you have Purusha and Prakriti. So what is the ultimate purpose of life according to Hinduism? The ultimate purpose of life according to Hinduism is to know this truth, is to know that you are the self, you are that Atman, you are that Purusha, you are that unchangeable. Knowing the truth. And Hinduism says that this nature is nothing but an illusion, a maya. So Bhagavan Krishna says that every action that you take, it doesn't matter what you do, whether you are eating, whether you are sleeping, whether you are looking at something, even when you are learning, every choice that you make, every action that you take, it leads either towards Purusha or towards Prakriti, either towards freedom or towards bondage. Think about it this way. This is a coin, it has a head and a tail. Now, of course, by head, I don't necessarily mean it has a big giant head of a cobra. That is not what I'm saying. It has two sides. Just the same way, let's say for instance, light and darkness. I have light in my face, and that is precisely the reason why I have darkness in the back. Okay. We have a head and a tail. So life is about this duality. You have to distinguish, you have to make these distinctions in every aspect of life. Whether you are sitting, whether you are sleeping, whether you are eating, even when you learn caste system, like we will talk about caste system in detail in the very next episode, okay? So bear with me for a moment. So every aspect of life, according to Hinduism, has to be analyzed under this framework, under the framework of discrimination, because this discrimination is the source of all the changes that happens in the world, is the ultimate cause of life itself. That one of these actions, whichever action you take, it doesn't matter whichever action you take, every action either leads you towards this head or this tail, either leads you towards freedom or towards bondage. So even if you do not see, nonetheless, you are still discriminating. You are still making a particular choice. So this choice, this discrimination is what is the bedrock of civilization, is the bedrock of life. So how do you create this peaceful society? Like putting all of those things aside, like Purusha, Prakriti and all those things aside, putting the philosophy aside, that how can you create a peaceful society? To create a peaceful society, you have to uphold this individualism. You need the notion of responsibility. You need to find unity in this variety. So how do you find this unity? You find this unity through discrimination. You find this unity through taking up responsibility. What is life? Life is this change. Life is this variety. So you have to uphold this variety. You have to uphold this individualism. Without this individualism being upheld, you cannot maintain, you cannot sustain life. Again, all of these arguments are actually coming from Swami Vivekananda. He argues that the moment when you resort to a particular state, let's say for instance a peaceful society, this is a state. When you reach that equilibrium, when you reach that ideal state, guess what happens? Creation stops. Creation will not happen if there is only one state. Creation can only happen in this change. When you stop to appreciate this variety, when you stop to appreciate this change, that is when life also stops, because life is nothing but this change. The question is how you look at it. Creation and destruction, not the same thing, just how you look at it. How you look at it. Light and darkness, how you look at it. You may call it destruction, but life, this is about change. It is nothing but life. When you embrace life, you embrace creation as well as destruction. You embrace light as well as darkness. You embrace this head as well as this tail. So every action that you take, every choice that you make, it has to be analyzed under this discrimination. Again, you are already discriminating. The question is, are you aware of this discrimination? Are you aware of this distinction yourself? This is the question that Hinduism poses to humanity. Now the obvious question is that what happens when you fail to distinguish? What happens when you fail to discriminate? Or you try to stop this discrimination? As we just explained, life is about this discrimination. So what happens when you stop, when you fail to uphold this discrimination? What happens then? That is when life stops. That is when life becomes stagnant. I give you a couple of examples. Let's say for instance, good and evil. How good and evil is defined? Now, one of the key misunderstanding in this dialogue of Judeo-Christian philosophy is the notion of good and evil. Like, what is this universe is all about? It's a divine play between good and evil. This is what universe is all about. Like, if you look at any matter, there is something good, there is something evil. A human being or an animal or anything. So this good and evil is actually inseparable. And this divine play is the essence of civilization. But if you come to Hinduism, Hinduism does not necessarily distinguish between this good and evil, because obviously that resides within you. And Hindus are saying that because it resides within you, you have to perform yoga, suppression of the negative tendencies and uplifting of the positive. Okay, the notion that came out of Patanjali, the notion of yoga, that arousing of the kundalini, the good energy, and bringing it to the Sahasrara so that you can attain freedom. But this is not the view of the Judeo-Christian philosophy. Like, what do you see in Judeo-Christian philosophy? You see that you have Allah and Satan. You have Christ and Antichrist. So how do you suppress, when we are saying that you have to suppress the negative tendencies and uplift the positive? So how do you suppress this negative, evil? You have to fight them like physically, because they exist outside of you. There is no other way to suppress them. if they were inside of you, then the notion of yoga comes along. Arousing of the Kundalini. You can arouse your Kundalini. But when you look at Judeo-Christian philosophy, you look at, like, especially not just Islam is obviously, Christianity as well. Okay. You see violence, like what are the reasons behind this violence? Violence against the non-believer. You have an entity, an evil entity that resides outside of you, non-believer. And that's why these Judeo-Christian philosophies have been the catalyst for slaughter, for genocide of hundreds of millions of people. Because there is no other way to eliminate evil. You have to eliminate the non-believers, isn't it? They reside outside of you. This is one of the fundamental distinctions I want to clear it up. Like when people are saying that how can there be millions of gods and goddesses, one of the questions that you will see coming from the Judeo-Christian people from the Judeo-Christian philosophies, they fail to recognize the fact that these millions of gods and goddesses, like this is the notion of Advaita philosophy, philosophy of oneness, Krishna's divine vision. What is the highest of all philosophy? The highest of all philosophy is this Advaita philosophy, philosophy of oneness. That how do you get to this Advaita philosophy? How do you come to this oneness? Again, you can be free, like arousing this Kundalini, this good energy, bringing it to the Sahasrara, become free. Then you can attain that divine vision, perhaps. But this notion, Advaita philosophy, philosophy of oneness, is completely foreign. Completely foreign to people coming from Judeo-Christian philosophies. They see world as they themselves as good, chosen people, and everyone else as evil. And when you have this kind of flawed idea, this kind of lackluster idea, to put it bluntly, then how do you expect peace out of this kind of philosophies? That is one of the questions that I want to ask Dr. Peterson. Like, if you are saying that you want to get to peace, right? This is your proposition, not mine. My proposition is freedom. But let's assume that you are right. If you think that you want to go to peace, can you actually go to peace with the notion of evil that resides outside of you? Unbelievers, so to speak. Can you attain peace from this kind of civilizational model? You can't. There'll always be antagonism, there'll always be hostility. Because you have to find someone to blame. Unbelievers. So you can never be at peace with the unbelievers. And that is exactly what you see in case of Islam. They are the worst of all creatures. They have to be fought against, they have to be subjugated, they have to be butchered, on and on and on. So that's one of the key misunderstanding, key misconceptions I thought I might as well clear up. Now, as we are discussing this good and evil, I just want to point out a psychological notion. The notion of association. What it simply means is this, that if you associate yourself with good, you become good. You associate yourself with evil, you become evil. Birds of the feather flock together. In other words, it means that the environment can have a very significant, can have a very deep impact on who you become. Because psychology, the notion of association, suggests that if you associate with evil, you become evil. So it is basically an environment that is having an impact on you. If that is the case, then how do you justify these good and evil being two completely separate things? This notion, the current understanding of Judeo-Christian psychology or Judeo-Christian philosophy, if you put it under the scrutiny, under the notion of association, can it be justified that these two beings can be completely separate? If you look at the Indic perspective, We are saying that this good and evil resides within you. And the notion of association can be justified in this manner. You associate with good, you become good, arousing that kundalini, that good energy, that pure energy, whatever it is. But if you think that the good can exist or the evil can exist only outside of you, then what is the impact of the environment? Can it be justified in terms of psychology? Can this notion of good and evil, being two separate entities, be justified by the notion of association, by psychology? So I think these ideas are fundamentally flawed. When we are saying that these good and evil that exist outside of you, okay, these notions cannot be justified by psychology. These notions are utterly and entirely flawed. And there is yet another example that is even more striking. Let's say, for instance, the notion of monotheism. What is monotheism? That if there is a God, there is only one God. Now, it may sound very intuitive that how can there be multiple gods? Like some of the arguments that come precisely out of the Abrahamic philosophies is that how can a cow be a god? How can a dog be a god? Bhagavan Krishna is talking about divine vision, that behold my hundreds and thousands of wonderful forms. Again, because we are talking about change, we are talking about life. Life is about variety. Anyway, so monotheism suggests that if there is a God, there is only one God. So this monotheism, although it may sound very intuitive, it may look right, it comes with a very serious problem. It goes against life. It comes with collectivism. There are some assumptions when this one God theory is being implemented via monotheism. Let's take, for instance, the case of Islam. First pillar of Islam is what? Shahada. What is Shahada? That there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. That you are taking an oath of allegiance where you are confirming that there is no God but Allah. What is the key word here? No God but Allah. I am not against someone trying to say that there is only one God. But when you say that there is only one God, what comes out of this one God is where the problem is. And in Islam, it says this is the worst of all sin. That what is the gravest of all sin is to commit shirk, is to associate partners with Allah. So now you can clearly see that there is an element of exclusion. There is an element of rejection. What comes of this rejection? Fanaticism. If you want to follow Allah, that's fine. But when you say there is no other God, when you are disassociating yourself or whoever wants to follow Islam from all the other gods and goddesses, all the variety, all the change, guess what you end up with? You end up with fanaticism. Because this is an idea of exclusivity. You are saying that there is no God but Allah. That means you have to reject all the other gods and goddesses. You have to reject variety. You have to reject change. As we just discussed, what is life? Life is this change. That means you are going against life. And if you look at Christianity, this deification does not go beyond Jesus Christ. God the Father, God the Son, and God the Spirit. Like before Jesus was born, He was the Father. When Jesus is born, He is Jesus Christ, and after His death, He was resurrected as a Spirit. So Father, Son, and Spirit. This deification does not go beyond Jesus Christ. Okay? Once again, we are stuck with the same problem. You are going against this change. You are going against this variety. You are going against this individualism. You end up with collectivism, believers and unbelievers. And in Islam, unbelievers are the worst of all creatures, and in Christianity, unbelievers will be burning in hell for eternity. They will be eternally barbecued. Once again, when you have these kind of ideas, when you go against life, when you fail to appreciate this individualism, you essentially destroy society. So going back to Dr. Jordan Peterson's argument that the ultimate purpose of life is to make peace, putting all the philosophy aside, even if you want to make peace, what do you need as a model? You need discrimination. You need this change. You need this variety. Because this is fundamentally what life is. What I came across time and time again in this Abrahamic philosophy is that is always like Christianity or Islam. These ideologies always prescribe against this change. Whichever ideology you choose, whether you choose Islam or you choose Christianity, both of these ideologies, they are against this change, they are against this life, they are against this variety. And I think this is a fundamental problem if you want to create a peaceful society. And that is why I fundamentally disagree with Dr. Peterson, which again I outlined many of the reasons as to why I disagree in my previous video, in the video that goes before this one. Okay, so long story short, to uphold this civilization, to create a peaceful society, you first of all, you have to implement this notion of discrimination. Without this notion being implemented, you cannot create a peaceful society. And then you look at some of the other things, not only the examples that I just described, that what comes out of this exclusion. We are talking about rejection of all the other gods and goddesses. What does it do? It creates a window for fanaticism. Although it's talking about unification, like Muslims say that they unified Arabia. But under this facade of unification, under this facade of monotheism, under this facade of one God theory, what they brought instead is fanaticism. So to uphold civilization, you have to uphold this individualism. You have to appreciate this change. When you stop this change, when you stop this individualism, you end up with collectivism. You end up with stagnation. Okay, and there are of course many other things. Although I'm explaining these things in a very simplistic way, there are many other things that came out of Abrahamic philosophies. Now let's dive a little deep into these Abrahamic philosophies, because guess what? These ideologies need to be exposed. These ideologies need to be exposed. You have seen how these prophets of Arabia, in the name of religion, a bunch of in the name of religion, slaughtered, butchered, murdered, raped, mutilated hundreds of millions of people, billions of people. These so-called prophets of Arabia. Now, of course, Jesus Christ was a little exception, but all these Joshua, this David, this perfect human, this Prophet Muhammad, who are these people? Not only these so-called prophets of Arabia, a bunch of degenerates. Let's be honest about it. Except Jesus Christ, the rest of the pack, who are these people? If you are honest enough, if you want to talk about civilization, that's fine. If you want to talk about in the mosque or in your church, that's fine. He's a prophet. But for me, as an outsider, a degenerate savage. If you have no remorse for raping, slaughtering, murdering innocent civilians, who are you then? Are you civilized? Or are you a savage? What exactly did these people do to the humanity? Like in that lecture, Hijab made up like a book. He brought up a book, Body Count.
Nor me.
Yeah, so what I was putting as an alternative to that is that there is this kind of, I would call this maybe an Orientalist, a new Orientalist narrative, which states that Islam is incapable of X, Y, Z. Call it tolerance, call it whatever it is. And look at what's happened in Islamic history. You've got all of these deaths and you've got all of these kinds of things that are happening comparative to what we have in the West. And what we're saying is that let's look at what you have in the West, because liberalism was an ideology that was started in the 17th century. Really it was crystallized, with John Locke and all these kind of things then. And after liberalism was established, and in fact, the Constitution and the documents of the Founding Fathers and stuff like that were based on the liberal, secular principles. Even after that, you had Napoleonic Wars. Even after that, you had colonialism continue. You had slavery continue until 1867, whatever it was, the American Civil War ended. So what we're saying is that this picture of history, that, the West is best, basically, this idea, because our ideology can fix all problems, it's not reasonable when you look at the historical records. I mean, one scholar called Naveed Sheikh actually done a piece. It's called Body Count, and he was counting the amount of people that died in each civilization, and he put the Western civilization as the highest. And because you have things like World War I and World War II, and these things were, World War I and World War II were nationalistic conquests. They were not religiously inspired. I mean, you can argue to what extent were World War I and World War II religiously inspired, but certainly Islam was not a main feature of the 30 million people that died in World War I, or however many million people died in World War II. So,
look, I don't really think that book really worth a mention. Like, it's such a biased propaganda. What are all these books, these propaganda to? It doesn't even take account of all the invasions that has taken place from 7/11. Like, I'm talking about Bin Qasim. There is just one or two incidents, 1971, one or two incidents, that's what I could find. That, it was the Christianity that was, that has the highest death toll. All the atrocities that has been done in the name of Islam, completely whitewashed. Completely, again, you got Rashidun Caliphate, you got Umayyad Caliphate. How does these caliphates even exist? How did they control such a vast swath of land? They controlled it by genocide. Anyway, again, I discussed many of these things in my previous videos. So how do you uphold civilization? The way to uphold civilization is through discrimination. Not only that, they did some of the most, I'm talking about the most deplorable, the most depraved, the most sadistic behavior that you can imagine. It has been done in the name of religion. The most depraved behavior that you can imagine, or even if you can't imagine, those things have been done in the name of religion. Let's say, for instance, Prophet Muhammad's death. After his death, he supposedly died 632 or 634, but his latest his earliest biography comes about 740 or 750. Please don't quote me on the dates, because I'm not a historian, okay? I don't remember all the dates all the time. So this prophet, this so-called perfect human, his biography, the earliest biography, came about 150 years roughly after his death. So what exactly happened? People used to know how to write. Okay, so why didn't they write these things down? Or they actually did write these things down, and guess what? It has been destroyed. Dan Gibson made a very interesting documentary. I believe you must have seen that documentary. The Sacred Cities, I believe. Again, don't quote me. I will put a link in the description. So why these people, the so-called prophets of Arabia, why the historians didn't even bother to write it down? Or at least we don't have those sources available today. What exactly happened? Your guess is as good as mine. The most depraved, the most sadistic behavior that these so-called prophets of Arabia, that these people have demonstrated in the history over the last 1,000, 2,000 odd years, what does it tell you? What happens to the humanity if the scripture falls into the wrong hands? Was the Indian philosophers wrong then? We all know that the caste system is superstition. That's what we all know. But can you really deny the fact that if the scripture falls into the wrong hands, it can only cause misery, it can only cause devastation to the humanity? Now, if it was that, okay, look, what can happen to humanity? There is an example already in place you can draw a lesson from that example, but guess what? That example hasn't yet been made. What will happen to humanity because of those people? Because of those, the prophets, the messengers, what will happen to humanity? This is the question that I think everybody should ask. So going back to the original argument, like what Patanjali said, that if you cannot purify your thoughts, if you cannot suppress the negative and uphold the positive, if you cannot purify the thoughts, whatever else you are, but guess what? You are not civilized. Forget about 7th century Arabia, okay? A bunch of illiterate calling themselves prophet. They did whatever they did. Now look at the so-called scientific exploration. You got all the nuclear weapons just sitting around the world, just for the button to be pushed. Were the Indian philosophers wrong? Like, you can say whatever you want to say, that whether you need caste system, whether you need yoga, like arousing that kundalini, whatever you need. But my point is, the point that I'm hammering, the point that I'm emphasizing so much, that without this in place, that if you cannot suppress those negative tendencies like good and bad, this is you. It's not someone else, not Christ and Antichrist, that are two separate beings sitting up in the cloud. That's definitely not the case. That's definitely not the case. Good and evil, this is you. This is everything. All the beings that you are seeing, it definitely has a good and definitely has an evil. So if you cannot implement this process of suppressing the negative and uplifting the positive, how are you civilized then? Okay. And is democracy is the way to achieve it? Like, one of the very paradoxical ideas that I happen to come across is the notion of equality. What is collectivism? Collectivism is nothing but equality. What is life? Life is about this individualism. Life is about inequality. So when you force equality, you are going against life. You are going against this individualism. And now, let's shift our focus to democracy. Like at the very beginning of this video, we talked about individualism. We talked about appreciating differences. We talked about appreciating variety. That what is civilization? Civilization is nothing but appreciation of this variety, appreciation of this individualism. In any form, if collectivism comes, that society is doomed to fail. Take, for instance, the case of democracy. Again, we will talk about democracy in much more details in broader context on a separate episode, okay? But I am just giving you these ideas so that you can make this connection. Like, there is this ruling party and there is this opposition party. What does it mean? It means divide and conquer. When you create a division, when you fail to establish this individualism, you end up with collectivism. You are forcing equality. Like when equality comes in any form, what is life? Once again, life is about change. Life is about this discrimination, this variety. So if equality comes in any form, in case of democracy, you have the ruling party and the opposition party. Once again, you are falling into the trap of collectivism. So I don't think that democracy can be the solution for civilization. A civilization must uphold individualism. That's how I see it. So I think this is going to happen very soon because of these ideas, because of this democracy and all this nonsense. Millions of people, like, it's not a question of why, it's a question of when. Because of democracy, there will be a bloodshed, and guess what? It's not going to be a world war. Or at least that's what I hope. It's not going to be like somebody blowing up a nuclear warhead and destroying the planet. That's probably not gonna happen. But rest assured that there is civil war, street fight. People will kill each other. Is coming, is very soon. It may not happen it is actually happening in some parts of the world now. You got Bangladesh, for instance. What is happening in Bangladesh? You had the Israel-Palestine issue just over a year ago. Now it is happening in Bangladesh. So civil war could be on a limited scale, but it is happening nonetheless. And guess what? It is just going to get started. Because of these ideas, when you have a disease, what do? You have a disease, you need to cure the disease. You shouldn't be allowing it to spread all over your body. That's exactly what democracy does. It brings the good and bad equal, good and bad on the same level. What is civilization? Civilization is to suppress this negative and uplift the positive. And what does democracy do? Just the exact opposite. It gives equality to everyone and everything. Whether it's a bad idea or a good idea, fair enough, is all equal. Not only that you will face the consequences of these plagiarized ideas from the Indian philosophers via the Greeks and now spreading all over the world. Not only that the world will pay a huge price because of this plagiarism, but the question is how much bloodshed will have to happen. How much bloodshed will have to happen before people realizes that there was a civilization existed in the past which has been destroyed by mostly the Abrahamic, especially the destruction of all the libraries, burning of the libraries, the nomads, the Muslim that came in. Not only they slaughtered hundreds of millions of people, but guess what else they did? They burned down all our libraries. The knowledge center of the world have been destroyed. In the last 1,000 years or so, what has been done to humanity by these people, these so-called prophets of Arabia? Compared to what the Indian philosophers just achieved some 10,000 years ago, my worst fear is this, that not only this so-called democracy, not only that there will be a bloodshed, like I'm talking about billions of people, hundreds of millions at the very least. What we have seen over the last couple of months is just getting started. You just recently, there was an incident happening in Amsterdam. It's just getting started. All of these things, do you think that these things will go down without any trouble, without any dramas? I mean, really. I hope so, with my best intentions. I'm not hoping that there will be something, but as history tells us, there will be a lot of things. History repeats itself, and it will repeat in a very ugly way this time. And it will happen because of democracy, because of this cultural communism, because of this equality. Equality and freedom, they do not work side by side. You can choose one, but not both. Whatever message that you take, like I gave you a couple of examples here. We talked about caste system a little bit, like we'll talk a lot about caste system. At least my understanding of the caste system, that why it was necessary or why it will be necessary. We talked about caste system, we talked about yoga, and of course, message of Krishna, war. So one of the foundational principles of Hinduism is this discrimination. What is the underlying, what is the thread that, that ties all of these ideas? Discrimination. Caste system one of the legs, one of the foundational legs, that the chair that I'm sitting down, it has 4 legs. Yes? If you take out one of the legs, what's going to happen? This chair will fall down. It's not going to stay like this. It will fall down. Not only what happened to humanity in the last several thousand years, but guess what? What will happen to humanity now that we have democracy? We have equality. What is democracy? Democracy is about equality. Now that we have equality, what will happen to humanity? If something has happened in the past, you could refer to that particular event in history. Let's say, for instance, communism. We know that at least 100 million people have been slaughtered because of communism. But what is the outcome of religious bigotry? We still don't know. Because to solve a problem, you have to recognize the problem first, isn't it? You have to understand that, oh look, there is a problem. Without recognition of that problem, how you want to solve it? Again, going back to the prophets of Arabia, all these Joshuas, these Davids, these perfect human, all these, again, to put it bluntly, who are these people? These are when this scripture fell into the hands of in the name of religion, they did it in the name of religion, isn't it? It's not that I'm trying to make it up. They did it in the name of religion. All the conquests that came out of the Middle East, they did it in the name of religion, in the name of pleasing the God. First of all, they didn't understand what the notion of God is. It's not polytheism that there are 33 million gods and goddesses that the so-called enlightened people couldn't even understand. It's one God. It's manifested in hundreds of millions of different forms. Krishna gave Arjuna divine vision that, behold, my hundreds and thousands of wonderful forms. They didn't understand, and in the name of God, not only that they didn't understand, but they did the worst bloodshed that humanity has ever seen. Like this religious fanaticism, that what is the cost, that what is the death toll? We don't even have an estimate as of today. We don't even have an estimate as I speak. Bring your scientists, bring all the Western enlightened philosophers. Let's see if they can give us an estimate. You guys lecture about humanity, you guys lecture about, oh, we gave everything, the liberalism and all this nonsense. Why don't you ask your philosophers, these so-called philosophers, okay, what is the death toll of the Abrahamic savagery and barbarism? Why don't you ask that? Why don't you ask your so-called scientists to give you an estimate? The people are so up in their arms talking about superstition, talking about, oh, India is these people are a bunch of superstitious people. Why don't you ask your scientists to give you an estimate of the death toll that is going to happen? Again, it's not a question of why, it's a question of when. Can they give us an estimate? Why don't you go and ask them? You people even haven't got the basic understanding that, okay, look, civilization is to suppress this negative and to uplift the positive. That definition hasn't yet been finalized, let alone divine vision. Krishna, Bhagavad Gita is talking about divine vision. The most foundational principle hasn't yet been understood, hasn't yet been grasped, let alone highest of the philosophy, the Advaita philosophy, philosophy of oneness. Polytheism. What is polytheism? According to the enlightened people, the chosen people, oh, there are, everything is a god. So how can a cow be a god? How can a dog be a god? They are mocking, they are doing their thing. That's how from polytheism they brought monotheism. They needed one God. Muslims brought the message of Allah and then destroyed, like fanaticism. What is monotheism? Like I have a video about monotheism as well, by the way. Fanaticism. 7 problems of monotheism that I discussed in that video. Again, I will put all of these videos in the description. So they brought fanaticism in the name of religion. In the name of religion, what these chosen people, these enlightened people had brought to the humanity: death and destruction, degeneration, fanaticism. Now, if you want to talk about equality, why don't you talk about the equality of a cat and a dog and a human being? Are they equal? Of course not. Why not? They are all life. Because our prophet said so. That's your response. A cat and a dog and a human being are not equal because our prophet said so. So what did the prophet say? The prophet said only the believers are equal. So what about the unbelievers? Well, they are the worst of all creatures. You see the problem, the fault lines of these nonsensical ideas. When you are talking about equality, you are hopping, you are jumping from one nonsensical idea to another. Whether it is the equality of the believers, fanaticism, monotheism, or the equality of the cultures, democracy, or the equality of the wealth, communism, financial equality. What is the underlying principle behind all of these nonsensical ideas? The notion of equality. And guess what? They are all flawed. They are all nonsensical. They are all fanatical. So when Swami Vivekananda said that equality is fanaticism, this is what Swami Vivekananda said. Was he actually wrong? Why did you needed equality? You wanted to unite people. Or at least the Muslims are not hiding it at all. They said they united Arabia through Islam. Okay. And also this is the same case in case of democracy. Why the political correctness was born? Because you wanted to reduce conflict in the society. You wanted to unite people. That was the intent. Not only you failed to achieve that objective, but what else you did? You brought fanaticism into the society. You brought fanaticism into the society with your nonsensical idea of equality. Have you not? Look, if we cannot get this sorted out, if we are not on the same page on this idea, the idea of inequality, discrimination is inequality, isn't it? If we cannot come on the same page on this particular idea, there is no going forward. There is no going forward. This idea has to be understood. And this idea had been given by the Indian philosophers some 10,000 years ago. And to be specific, it was coined by Patanjali. Idea of inequality. Idea of discrimination. However way you want to implement it, whether it's caste system, was, I'm not going to point my finger because guess what? I'm not a theologist. I don't have a degree in Hinduism. I'm not studying Hinduism for ages. Most of the things that I'm telling you, this came out of Swami Vivekananda. If you want to learn Hinduism, you have to, if you want to talk about philosophy, if there is one philosopher, if there is one, whom should I choose? Hands down, Vivekananda. So look, my understanding is that when it comes to human psychology, the Indian philosophers, what they understood, how they looked at the world, you guys should take a lesson from them. Instead of being self-righteous, instead of lecturing about civilization and enlightenment and chosen people and all those nonsense, democracy and equality and all this nonsense, You should look at the world with their lens, or at least try to understand a different perspective, how they looked at the world. I think it is going to solve a lot of problem. If you at the very least, if you're open about those suggestions, righty? Like, let me give you a little bit of background, like where am I actually coming from? Who made me interested in religion? Dr. Daniel Kahneman. Again, we will refer to this book when we'll be discussing about democracy in the next episode, okay? So Dr. Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, this was one of the books that really changed me. Like, I'm talking about a fundamental change, like change on my DNA, on my behavior. Whether it's a good change or a bad change, that's for other people to judge. But for me, it was like a shift in my perspective, in my thinking. And he's an atheist. And if I am honest with you, if I am completely honest with you, again, I'm talking to Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. Why don't you sit down with, like, maybe, I don't know your personal circumstances, but I would like to see one day you sit down with Dr. Daniel Kahneman and have a conversation about religion. That's what I would personally love to see. And if it ever happens, I would love to have a conversation with Dr. Daniel Kahneman in this channel, because he is the guy who made me interested in religion. He is the guy who changed me, for better or for worse, that doesn't matter. It's for other people to judge. But he changed my DNA. Okay, I still, after 1 decade, like that book to me, it's like a puzzle. I don't think I have been able to decipher that puzzle yet. Even today, like I'm talking about at least 1 decade, like I first read that book in 2009. And I still sometimes, when I think like unmindfully, some of these ideas I rethink, that I try to draw lesson out of those ideas. Again, these are deep psychological things. These are not simple things that you read once and you understand everything. That's definitely, like, at least maybe it's true for some other people, but that's definitely not my case. And I highly recommend that everyone who is listening to this, I highly recommend that you read that book. You may learn something new, who knows? But take it with a grain of salt that it might as well change you for worse. Keep that in mind. Like like I'm giving you a warning in advance, so that you may regret someday that why have I read that book? You might as well regret someday. So I'm giving you advanced warning so that day doesn't come to you. So do I regret reading that book? Sometimes yes. Sometimes yes. Again, Dr. Daniel Kahneman himself, he said he's an atheist. He kind of have a pessimistic view of life. Okay. So would you like to have the same view of life yourself? That's entirely up to you. But when you take the plunge, you take the plunge. Okay. So I'm giving you enough warning so that it's entirely up to you. What are you gonna do? But to me, that book changed me like fundamentally. It changed me like fundamentally. And then of course I got absorbed into the books from Swami Vivekananda, then of course Bhagavad Gita. So all of these things really inspired me to follow the teachings of Hinduism. Like these are the teachings, these are the lessons that actually inspired me to talk about these things. So what is the hallmark of civilization? The hallmark of civilization is inequality, not equality. Like we talked about caste system, that what happens to humanity if the scripture is given to the wrong people. People who are not purified. We are talking about purification of the thought. If your thoughts are not purified, if you cannot go back to yoga, right? We talked about in the last episode about the Kundalini, that you can arouse this energy. These Kundalini can be aroused, and as it is aroused and comes up to the head, the 1,000-petaled lotus, that's when you become a Rajyogi, you become free. But the foundation, the fundamental, like we talked about a couple of these ideas. You look at Bhagavad Gita, the Battle of Kurukshetra. How do you uphold civilization? You have to take up the arms and fight to destroy the evil. Caste system. The scripture knowledge shouldn't be given to everyone. Or yoga, arousing of the good energy. Like, what is the underlying principle behind all of these ideas? Inequality. Caste system, the idea of inequality. Yoga, good versus evil that is within you. And then, of course, Krishna's message, taking up the arms and fight to destroy the evil. Even if you are weak in numbers, even if you are small in numbers. Again, it's all about inequality. The underlying philosophy behind all of these ideas, inequality. Inequality is the hallmark of civilization. You look at nature, where have you seen equality in nature? There is no equality that exists in nature. But now you are telling me, in the name of democracy, like democracy is coming out of this Judeo-Christian philosophy. Man is created in the image of God. Where this equality is coming from? It's coming from there. Universal brotherhood. You have believers, unbelievers. They are all equal. These are all linked. Like, you cannot separate these ideas. Believers are all equal. How come believers are all equal? We will talk about like the problems of Christianity in a separate episode. Again, all of these things, there are so many ideas that are absolutely wrong, that are fundamentally so utterly flawed. So the hallmark of civilization is inequality. And who gave the world this civilization? Like, how do you uphold civilization? Who showed humanity the example? Krishna. John Locke or Voltaire, these are like, if I have to borrow the words of Swami Vivekananda, what did Vivekananda said? Babies talk. Western philosophy is babies talk. That's what Western philosophy is. As the different streams having their sources in different places, all mingle their water into the sea. O Lord, different paths that men take through different tendencies, various though they appear crooked or straight, all lead to thee. These are all God's path. These are not superstition. People are saying these so-called enlightened people, chosen people, they brought fanaticism, not civilization. Civilization is this unification, this Krishna's divine vision. That's what civilization is, and the hallmark of civilization is inequality, not equality. So in the next episode, we will elaborate. We will talk more about this idea of inequality. And along the way, we're going to talk about some of the common misconceptions. There are quite a few. So I thought I might as well do a separate talk based on those topics. So I hope to see you in the very next episode. But as you can understand, it will be also a very scathing episode for people who are coming from Judeo-Christian background. So until next time, thank you for watching, and I will catch up with you on the very next one. Bye for now.